And Mengistu, who is the dictator in Ethiopia, actually asked us to come. He realized that this interest in the Jews of Ethiopia could be an asset for him.
You're listening to Inside Israel Today with Gil Hoffman on the Land of Israel Network.
Hello and welcome to Inside Israel Today, broadcasting from beautiful Jerusalem. We are here at the Orient Hotel, a new hotel here on Emek Rephaim in Jerusalem, where the Jewish Agency's Board of Governors meetings have been taking place this week. That installed Isaac Hertzog as the new chairman of the Jewish Agency, replacing Natan Sharansky, who is theoretically at least retiring after a career in public service. And it's not easy sometimes for veteran Jewish leaders to retire. I have with me here our special guest on Inside Israel Today is Dr. B.Nasatir, who has been the head of the Jewish Federation in Chicago for decades. He's been serving the Jewish community of Chicago, the Jewish people, and Israel now for nearly 50 years. And when I received an email from his office that he was retiring, I'm making quote marks, I was in shock. I said, I thought he had another 30, 40 years to go, was what I sent to the spokesman of the Jewish Federation there in Chicago. And he said, well, you know, he's retiring, but you know him. And so thank you so much. Dr. Nasatir was making me call him Steve for coming here on Inside Israel Today.
Well, Gil, thank you very much. Thank you for all your good work in Israel, which I followed, and we're very proud of you as a former Chicagoan doing good in Israel and around the world for the Jewish people. I am not retiring, and that is the truth. I will be stepping out of my role as president and CEO of Federation June 2019, and that will mark 40 years in that particular position. Altogether, I think I've been will be at Federation 48 years, and I will have a new title, Executive Vice Chairman of the Federation Jewish United Fund, and I'll continue to do a whole lot of things in addition to providing support and assistance to my successor. But no, I'm not retiring. I continue to love what I've been privileged to have opportunity to do over these years, and will continue to do it as long as I'm able.
And I haven't retired as a Chicagoan. Anyone who wakes up at 5 o'clock in the morning to watch the Cubs lose a devastating game, as I did this morning, I'm still going to be a Chicagoan at heart forever if I don't stop doing that. So looking back at those nearly 5 decades in service, so what lesson have you learned that you can convey the world from your so many experiences that you've had?
I think one of the major lessons is to really sometimes, with all the hubbub of daily life and issues that seem to be important, I think the Jewish world from time to time needs to take a half a step backwards and realize just how privileged all of us are to live at a time of Jewish sovereignty in the land, and that this is an extraordinary achievement of the Jewish people, and notwithstanding this issue or that issue, that remains a different life experience for all of us, no matter how old we may be, from 2,000 years of previous generations. So, I do think sometimes people don't really understand that like they should. That's the major lesson. I've tried in what I've been involved in over these years to make that point over and over again. And I understand for people who are born and the state is here and it doesn't seem to be a miracle anymore, that criticisms flow easy. And we're a people who do criticize a lot and argue a lot, and that's good. But again, that fact of Jewish sovereignty for me is a primary point of pride and obligation as well.
Well, I think our listeners are reassured about the future of Israel and its strength here in its 70th year and everything. I think they're perhaps actually more worried about American Jews in the United States. And so can you reassure us that the American Jewish community is going to continue growing strong, and perhaps give us some examples from Chicago that show that it's being revitalized despite negative reports that there have been?
Sure. I think, like all things, the glass is half full. First of all, in Chicago, I am pleased to report the Jewish community. We're about 300,000 Jews in Chicago. It's a strong Jewish community. It's always been a strong Jewish community. It's a pro-Israel community in significant numbers. It's a community that takes care of itself. It takes care of others. It's involved in the fabric of society in America, and very, very much connected to Jews worldwide. We've actually, last year, one of the reasons, frankly, that I'm stepping out at this time is because the Federation is in great shape. We financially had our very best year last year.
Wow.
For a one Jewish federation to have resources in 2017 of over $300 million is not an insignificant amount. Money isn't everything. That doesn't mean that there aren't challenges. There, of course, are challenges, serious ones. And for us, I think our main challenges is really next generation. And again, historic view, I think for generations and generations, Jews always worried about the generation beyond them. I remember reading issues in the Forward in the early 1900s, back-ish. I wasn't around in the 1900s.
I was going to ask about Maxwell Street if you were there.
I was. I of course do remember Maxwell Street, but I was not born in 1900. But what were those Bintel briefs about? It was about the next generation, forgetting being Jewish and not being able to continue from generation to generation. So I think that is an issue for us. We're in a open American society that is undergoing tremendous changes too. You look at some of the reports. Synagogue attendance is down in many sections of the Jewish community, but church attendance is also down. Secularization of America, which I don't think is a very good thing, happens to be a prevailing theme, unfortunately. So what happens in the big society, we should not expect not to happen in our society. The rancorous kind of politics that exist in America, and trust me, they are toxic right now.
Much more than here.
Even much more than here, believe it or not. And I come from Chicago, so that also has its impact on Jewish community. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to rise about those challenges and to think about the new modalities of how to transmit Jewish tradition, love of Israel, an obligation to Jews all over to this next generation. And I think in a large measure we are succeeding.
Yeah, young people are giving to Jewish federations?
Absolutely. We have an event once a year that's called the Great Event. It's from our young adult division, and consistently, year after year, more than 2,000 people come to that event. They come, they hear a understanding of what's going on in the community. They make a gift to the annual campaign. And many of them then go on to additional kinds of involvement. Again, I wouldn't suggest that one event per year suggests that all is great. That would not be correct. There's much out there. We're very concerned about issues on college campus. We're very involved.
Let's go to that issue, because over here, when Natan Sharansky, here's my quote marks in the air again, which don't really work on radio, retired, he took over this effort to send more and more emissaries to college campuses around North America and ensure a presence there, teaching people the truth about Israel, fighting BDS. In Chicago, I myself have had protests against me. The ADL, in their report on college campuses, said, we know we have a problem if a relatively parv speaker like Gil Hoffman has walkout protests at colleges that people haven't heard of, like Benedictine. Are we winning the fight, and what do we have to do to win that fight?
I think we're winning more than we're losing, but you need to understand that every time that there's a BDS-type initiative on campus, even when, quote, we win, like, for example, we just had one at the University of Illinois, We worked very,
Congratulations.
very hard to defeat that, and we did by a 2-to-1 margin. By the way, these past years, every year I meet with the presidents of University of Illinois, University of Chicago, Northwestern.
You don't have to say the N-word.
So, in any case, that's taking place. But every time we win, to a certain extent, Israel still loses. And what I mean by that is, for the great unwashed, issues of apartheid and genocide, unfairly used, inappropriate to be sure, when those kinds of words get spread around, who knows what the impression is in the minds of college students. And college students also, and here's where the enemies of Israel are actually kind of smart, college students want to be at the vanguard of social issues, and they want to be involved in what are the issues of the day. And this concept of intersectionality in terms of, well, if you go on Birthright, or if you attend Hillel, or if you attend lectures from Gil Hoffman, then by definition you can't participate with us. And that actually happens on some campuses. This is tough stuff. And it's tough stuff for a 19-year-old to try to figure out what that means. Some say, who needs any of this Jewish involvement? I'm just going to mind my own business. Some begin to get swayed by the propaganda of the others, and still others, really heroes. And I think Jewish college students in some ways get a bad rap. People hear all the time, well, if only they really were able to better get the facts out. And college, young people, and we're a community that sends our young people to college in disproportionate numbers. They go to school to learn, to grow socially, to date, to have a good time before they've really become adults. They have all kinds of issues going on there. To expect them to be advocates of Israel 365 days a year is kind of ridiculous.
I spoke yesterday at a wonderful Federation-supported project, Do the Right Thing. That I'm sure you initiated that. You've initiated everything in Chicago, which trains high school students to be Israel advocates. And that is the key, to have them ready when they get to college. And I wish more such programs existed around North America, especially being a graduate. The reason why I called Northwestern the N-word was my listeners know that I'm a graduate who's proud in many ways and not proud in other ways. Having that BDS resolution pass in the student government of Northwestern, as well as a couple other things that have gone on, shows where mistakes were made and what needs to be fixed.
Again, first of all, the Right On for Israel, thanks for the nice compliment. That is a Chicago program. We're very proud of those young people. They work hard, by the way. It's not just you get a trip to Israel. It's a trip to Israel after a year of serious study and engagement and learning how to be advocates for Israel. And they're terrific, and they're our brightest and best, and we're very, very proud of them and proud of that program. And there's no question that Zionist education needs more and more at lower levels. We also, by the way, we take a non-day school 8th grade trip to Israel.
Wow.
And if you think about that, non-day school parents entrusting the Federation to take their 14-year-old children to Israel without them is interesting by itself. This year we'll have like 240, 250 kids come from Chicago.
Oh, my God.
Non-day school. So we're doing a lot of those things, but back to my other point, notwithstanding all these good things that we're doing, and I think other communities need to do more of that as well, again, the expectation that the individual is on call 24/6 or 24/7 in terms of Israel is just not realistic. But during these periods of times of BDS and what we've learned, notwithstanding adult feelings about this issue or that issue on whatever campus, we really try to follow where the student leadership is and try to listen carefully to how they think is the best way to fight these kinds of things. They may not exactly be our first suggestion, but they're really the only suggestion worth doing. I think sometimes people parachute into campuses or have views on what they could or shouldn't do. You need to listen to the kids, the Jewish kids that are on campus. And again, that's something we've learned I think we do a good job of listening, and then, of course, helping them to defeat these kinds of unfair, unbalanced propositions.
So I want to give you credit also for another accomplishment that you had. Illinois was the first state in America to pass an anti-BDS resolution unanimously. Tell us what the resolution says and how you brought it about.
That it was an anti-BDS resolution in connection with the investment of pension funds. That's how we got at it. We thought it was very important to get something like that on the books. This existed, curiously enough, in other years way back when, in terms of anti-Iranian type of bills. Anyhow, we worked the legislature. We helped draft the proposition. We worked with our Jewish group in Springfield, and we were very pleased to have that pass. We were the first to pass such a resolution. It was immediately signed by the governor. And I think today, there's 23 states now in the union that have 20, maybe perhaps a little higher, that have now passed this. And our JFNA and the Israel Action Network have taken the models, and they're a little bit different in different states depending on what the opportunities are. But we're going to continue to push and push until we get all 50 states to pass similar type of resolution.
It's really cool that after Northwestern disinvested the zero money that the student government was investing in Israeli companies, that the state of Illinois made it illegal to invest in the student government of Northwestern, I guess, pension funds at least.
Well, it's state pension funds. By the way, Northwestern, notwithstanding that resolution passed, by the way, I have a graduate degree from Northwestern too, so I'm an alum also. No university has followed a divestment resolution, and that, of course, includes Northwestern and every other university. So the student government can pass it, but no university has followed that recommendation, and I don't think any will in the foreseeable future.
That's wonderful. So now I want to take you back. Let's go back in your career. Am I correct that you brought Barack Obama to Israel for the first time?
The Federation was involved in that trip to Israel at that time. We were pleased to bring then Senator
State Senator
Obama to Israel for the first time. Yes,
you weren't with him.
I was not. I was not personally, and just some of my colleagues were, in fact, met with him.
So Illinois, Chicago, leads. In many ways, the Chicago Jewish community has had a big impact on Israel, and that's just one small way. Can you let our listeners know what you've done to help build up the state of Israel?
Well, again, like anybody, ours is each of us are small contributions to the building up in the state, but collectively, I think tremendous impact. And I think that we just celebrated, of course, the 70th anniversary of Israel's independence, and we developed a film in connection with that 70th anniversary, and we interviewed members of our community reflecting upon that day. One was who had been an Oleh here at that time, mustering out of the U.S. Army and then coming here to Israel and standing out the Zachnut window when Ben-Gurion announced the state. And, of course, he told that story with tears in his eyes, as did others who were there at the time. Again, Chicago, we have a glorious story in our federation. There is the story of Golda, Ben-Gurion sending Golda Meir to the States, frankly, to raise money.
She came to Chicago?
She did come to Chicago. She came to Chicago because the then Jewish federations of the combined Jewish federations of all around the world were meeting in Chicago. So that's why she came to Chicago. But while she was here, she was invited to our federation. And I've had the opportunity to read those minutes. And Golda says in those minutes that the issue of proclaiming a state, that decision has been done. The decision to defend that state, that will be done by us. The question is, will you help us? And the next day, the leadership of the Federation, this is 1948, went out and took a $5 million loan out from the bank.
That must have been a huge amount of money back then.
A huge amount of money back then. And I think that's the point. The point is this kind of infrastructure that has existed for all these years to be able to do those kinds of things on a moment's notice, and it really speaks to the capacity of the federations. And again, when I began my work, the federations clearly were the largest system. We're still the largest system nationally. I think total revenue for the federations last year was close to $2 billion. It's not
of which you give to Israel what percentage about?
It depends. I have to, it depends on the year, of course.
More in Chicago than other places.
We're proud to be close to about, of our annual campaign, net, we're about 40% of our money actually goes overseas.
Thank you.
Yeah, again, it's our pleasure and our obligation. So, but again, it's a changing world, and again, I like to think Chicago has done a lot in terms of keeping up with those changes, and to the extent that we're a leader for other communities to look towards and think about doing similar kinds of things, that will continue to happen. But the point is that long history and involvement with the Jewish people is very real. And I think the other huge event during that period of time was both the struggle for Soviet Jewry, of which I was privileged to be another small part of.
There were protests in Chicago to get Natan Sharansky out of prison?
Not only that, first of all, I went to visit refuseniks any number of times, as did many people. Chicago was a hotbed of advocacy, a constant going over. Again, we weren't heroes. We had passports. Like the worst.
We hear so much about New York. Tell us what happened in Chicago.
Oh my goodness! And
in Washington, we hear.
In Chicago, it was the first protest of the Bolshoi. I remember the Bolshoi come, and people were concerned: is that a good thing? This is a part of relationships with the Soviet Union. It won't be good. It won't be bad. We said, never mind. They're holding our people. We're going to protest and tell people that they shouldn't go to the Bolshoi, but that was just a small part of our advocacy. I was there on the Mall the day of the march on Washington, which was another. And by that time, Natan Sharansky was out and was a leader.
Yuli Edelstein was still in. He left last.
That might have been. You may be correct, but the Slapeks were out. Ida Nudell was out, and of course, Gorbachev was visiting with Reagan. Wow. And so I don't know. I don't think it's apocryphal, but the president said to Gorbachev, "You see what people in America think about the oppressive way in which you're holding Soviet Jews back. You must let those people go." And, of course, they did. And that's the second part of the story. There was 25 years of advocacy, and then 1 million or more here in Israel. We took in close to 40,000 in Chicago. It transformed Israel, and it's having a serious impact in Chicago and other communities as well. These were educated people. They perhaps didn't know from Yiddishkeit. Their Jewish connections were cut off for all those years. But their contribution now, we're seeing now in the next generation, talking about next generations, significant involvement in Jewish life, and it's a rich, new, and exciting source of inspiration for the Jewish people.
And you were also involved in bringing Ethiopian Jews to Israel, which was a challenge in a different kind of way.
Absolutely. I actually, that one, and I think it was 1983, I was part of 5 people that came out of what was then the National Jewish Community Relations Advisory Council, which is a mouthful to say. And Mengistu, who is the dictator in Ethiopia, actually asked us to come. And I think it was because at that time there was a war in Eritrea, and he realized that this interest in the Falasha, the dark-skinned Jews of Ethiopia, could be an asset for him. In a way, it was the beliefs in anti-Semitism. Jews control the world. We have some Jews. perhaps there's a way I can use this for my own purposes. And whatever his reasons for it, we took advantage of that, and I did have the privilege of being one of those very early groups that went into the Gondor province. I remember meeting with Franklin Mossad in Rome before we went in, because at that time there was a trickling of people walking across Sudan and being picked up by Israel and brought here in small numbers. And again, we were fact-finding. I remember talking to the U.S. ambassador because he couldn't go into Gondor, and we were being permitted. So he said, when you come back to Addis, be sure to come back and tell me what you saw, which, of course, we did. So it had its James Bond connotations to it, which was interesting to be sure, and tense at times, too. But, again, and then that extraordinary two airlifts of Ethiopian Jews here to Israel. And then, again, resettlement, Klita is never easy for any group. It was especially difficult, I think, for Ethiopian Jews.
Still is.
And it still is. By the same token, again, the pride in seeing doctors and colonels in the army.
And the first Israeli diplomat abroad was an Ethiopian Jew, was Belinich Zavadia, sent to Chicago and later the ambassador to Ethiopia.
100%, and we're very proud of her. She's a wonderful woman, an intelligent lady who really has done great work on behalf of her country, Israel, in Africa as an ambassador and as a messenger of the truth about Israel to the African continent.
And so here we are at the Orient Hotel, where we've had these events of the Jewish Agency Board of Governors, the people involved in setting some of the policies for bringing these Ethiopian Jews to Israel still, and Russian immigrants, and so many Jewish identity projects that still are going on. What was the significance of the appointment of Isaac Hertzog this week to move this Jewish agency forward?
I think it was a very important decision. Again, I'm a big lover of the Jewish Agency. I've been coming to these Jewish Agency meetings for probably 40-some years, and really take great pride in the great work that they do. And I think the transition from a hero of the Jewish people, Natan Sharansky, to another well-known Jewish leader in Isaac Hertzog was very important. It reaffirms the continued importance of the Jewish Agency. And I had opportunity to have a one-on-one with Bougie Hertzog the other day. He's anxious and eager to get going. He's got a lot of vigor and enthusiasm. He's also someone, because of his North American experience, which is significant, does understand some of the problems, some of the tensions between diaspora Jews and the government of Israel. And I think he's uniquely positioned, because of his understanding, to in fact be a positive source for good in healing some of those ruptures here and there and moving the Jewish people forward. So I think it's a very good thing.
This has been a very optimistic interview, and you're an optimistic guy, and I'm an optimistic guy. What are you worried about?
Well, I'll come back to there's two things that I worry about. I worry about the point I made, next generation. Even though I try to be optimistic, and I am, and I think if we're smart and work hard. But the real issue in next generation, at the end of the day, with all due respects to Federation and synagogues and schools, it's parents. The way to go from generation to generation is what the parental behavior is. And if the parental behavior doesn't have significant Jewish content and dimension to it, then it's highly unlikely that the young people will in fact have this Jewish connection. That's a tough one, so we really have to think long about it. So that continues to be a serious concern. And notwithstanding all the success in 70 years and all the challenges that Israel has overcome, of course I continue to worry about Israel in terms of the existential issues, and only through strength and only through unity of the Jewish people can we be sure that Israel will be here for the next 2,000 years.
That's beautiful. Thank you for this very inspiring interview here, Dr. B.Nasatir, the longtime head of the Jewish Federation there in Chicago. Really appreciate you making the time here to come on Inside Israel today on the Land of Israel Network, on thelandofisrael.com.
Thank you so much, Gil. Appreciate being with you.
Thank you, listeners, for being here, and we'll have another exciting show next week from here in Jerusalem. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
What secrets lie in the earth, in the world's most sacred and sensitive site, the Temple Mount? And why are some people so anxious to destroy them? Tune in to Rejuvenation with me, Eve Harrow, as I interview preeminent archaeologist Dr. Gabi Bar-Kai on the latest desecration of the Temple Mount during the waning days of Ramadan last week.